Hi, welcome to an introduction to constitutional iridology. Tonight we're going to talk about what iridology is, what iridology can and can't do, and some of the basic concepts of iridology in this introductory class. So I want to talk about why I like iridology and why I think iridology is such a useful tool. In fact, in the American Herbalist Guild, of which I'm a professional member, iridology generally does not have a great reputation. A lot of the founding members of AHG were exposed to the kind of iridology that was taught by Bernard Jensen and then carried on by a lot of Utah herbalists like John Christopher and Ladine Griffin and so forth. And that model of iridology was based on the idea that the iris could be used to diagnose the condition of the tissues. In other words, it was based on the idea that if you broke a bone or you injured some part of your body, that a mark would appear in the eye to signify or show that some kind of damage had been done to the body. So therefore, you could look in the eye and actually make a diagnostic characteristic of the thing. And that was my first introduction to iridology, was that same idea. My early experiments in kind of looking at iridology seemed to make that right. I had some basic iridology materials from Dr. Bernard Jensen, and I actually looked in both of my parents' eyes. It took me about an hour to do a reading for both of my parents because I kept having to look in their eyes and then look at the charts in the book and look back in their eyes, look at the charts in the book, because I really didn't know too much what I was doing. But I know at the end of the reading, my dad said, well, you've identified every health problem I've ever had. But my dad was about 70 at the time. However, later I actually looked in the eyes of some people, like some young children who were very healthy, who had a lot of markings in their eyes that didn't seem to have any health problems that correlated with those markings. And I remember meeting a woman once who had severe problems with her intestines. And from what I understood about iridology at the time, I couldn't see any sign that, in the iris there would be any problems with the intestines whatsoever. So that was, kind of puzzling to me. So in 1986, I was privileged to actually go to the first iridology conference ever held, in which Bill Cardona and Harry Wolf, who founded what is now IPA, International Iridology Practitioners Association, which was then NIRA, the National Iridology Research Association, held a symposium. They had Dr. Bernard Jensen there, and they also had Denny Johnson there, who developed the RAID model. And so I got exposed to all of that. In fact, I just attended the IPA symposium that was kind of celebrating, I think, the 35th year of IPA, and they actually showed some video clips from that, and Bill Cardona there said that they didn't let Bernard Jensen know that Denny Johnson was coming because he wouldn't have come if Denny had been there. But there was a lot of kind of division and controversy. But when I heard the idea that the iris was genetic, it was such a relief to me, because that made everything I had been seeing personally in the iris make perfect sense. In other words, the iris is basically showing our inherent physical and emotional makeup, and that was also what I learned at that conference, was that there was an emotional interpretation to everything that you see in the eye. And this goes along the line of the traditional idea of constitution, because all traditional constitutional types in every system of medicine have tendencies towards certain physical health problems as well as certain personality traits. So it's the idea that form and function go hand in hand, and therefore the kind of person I am in my personality and my mental and emotional makeup also is tied intimately in with the kinds of health problems I'm prone to. So I've been in discussion with some professional members of the AHG who go, well, what good is that? Well, to me, it's really useful, because to me, it's a big part of the picture of a person's health, the idea of what is their constitution. And that's because, of the model that I use, the way I look at this, which many of you may be familiar with and some of you may not. It's the disease tree, which I created in 1980 as an idea of explaining the idea that there are root causes of illness, and that we want to work on the root causes of illness instead of on the various manifestations of illness. Now, Kimberly Ballas helped me fill in the idea that the soil in which the disease tree grows is the constitution, and the idea that the trunk and major branches were biological terrain in the body systems. So that kind of filled in the model. But constitution is an important part of this model, and I'm going to show you why. When most people look at health, they look only at the disease. And I'm actually in the process right now of writing a little booklet explaining why treating disease will never get you healthy. And the reason why I have come to the conclusion of that is that most people see health as a lack of disease, but the truth is disease is a lack of health. And there's a big difference between those two statements. Disease comes because there is a lack of health. And so when you're trying to treat a lack, you're focused on the wrong thing. You got to focus on what you're lacking, which is health. So when you just try to treat a disease, you're acting like the disease is an entity in and of itself, that somehow by identifying it we can kick it out of the body or attack it or get rid of it. But that's not really what's happening. What's really happening is we have this constitution, this inherent genetic and possibly somewhat early childhood conditioning nature to ourselves. And we encounter various stresses in our environment. We might wind up with nutritional deficiencies, or we might wind up with a lot of mental and emotional stress, or we might wind up being injured or exposed to some kind of toxins or whatever. And as long as our body is strong enough to resist that, it's probably not going to be a problem. In other words, if I've got a really healthy body and a really healthy liver and I get exposed to a toxin in my body, I'll probably kick it out really fast and it won't, really make me sick. But if I'm got a constitutional defect, my liver is not very good at processing environmental toxins, and then I happen to work in a chemical factory, then that's going to give rise to disease. The picture of what is giving rise to the disease arises when you look at a person's constitution and then you look at their diet, lifestyle, and what's going on in their environment, and you piece those two things together. And then you start to see why they're sick. They're sick because in some way their body is not strong enough to or healthy enough to cope with the environmental problems that they're facing. And therefore the remedy is what will help to either strengthen their constitution to help make up for the constitutional defects or weakness, or it is removing the offending environmental influence in order to create balance in their body so that they can successfully cope with life. So to me, I don't even, when someone just says, okay, how do you treat X, Y, Z disease? I don't know. I mean, that's really what I want to answer. I don't know. Who are we talking about? What is this person like? What's their diet? What's their lifestyle? What's going on? Then I can start to see what the picture is and actually come up with reasonable recommendations. But just throwing remedies at a disease name is really a very, very ineffective way to approach health. And any of you who take my running a successful consulting business class, I actually go into an explanation of that, how that naming of diseases and tossing remedies at names is really worthless in terms of helping people restore their health. So what the eye is telling us is it's telling us a person's genetic strengths and weaknesses. If I can look in the eye of a 5 and 6 and 7-year-old child and I can see that they already have an inherent tendency to cardiovascular problems or diabetes or arthritis or weakness of their respiratory and immune system or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, think of how valuable that is. Now I know that that if I can early adopt, a proper diet, lifestyle habits to help support those systems which are inherently prone to malfunction in that person, I'm likely to help prevent them from ever getting sick in the first place. I can also tell a person's resiliency. Some people have greater constitutional resiliency. They can handle a lot more stress and abuse and everything and get away with it, and some people don't. And if you're one of those people who don't, then you can't compare yourself to the people who do. You're going to have to, be a little more careful with your health, a little more careful with your energy. In other words, it becomes a very good tool for me to be able to help guide a person towards a healthy diet and lifestyle. You also get basic personality tendencies, I'll explain a little bit later, which tells you how a person learns and gives you a way to start relating to them as a human being and knowing how to communicate and get through to them and relate to them and work with them. The pupil tonus is also an indicator of nervous system function. That is actually not a genetic thing. That's actually an in-the-moment kind of thing. Now, those are major things the eye shows. What the eye can't show, the major things, is any actual diseases. So I've had people tell me an iridologist looked in their eyes and told them they had candida, or they had parasites, or they had this or that, and that is actually fallacious. You cannot look in the iris and actually see a pathology, either an infection or parasites, or even if a person actually has a problem with a particular organ or system. You cannot either tell, if looking in the eye, if a particular organ is inflamed or irritated or something else. You can see that it's prone towards inflammation or prone towards irritation or prone towards stagnation, but you can't see that whether it is currently or not. You also can't tell how well a person is supporting their health through their diet and lifestyle and so forth. In fact, if a person is not eating healthy and they're not living a healthy lifestyle, then it's very likely you can look in their eye and basically tell them what kinds of health problems they have, which is, I think, why a lot of iridologists get away with kind of diagnosing, is because the people who are coming to see them are sick. And so if you look at a car, for example, that you buy off the lot, and you knew that there were certain factory defects in that car that would make it, when that car was subject to a lot of stress, that's where that car would break down, then you have a pretty good indicator that when a person is under stress, i.e. when they're sick, that they're likely to have broken down in those areas where they're most subject to weakness and breakdown. But you can't look into a healthy person's eye and basically say the same thing. In fact, that's where iridologists got in trouble. I was teaching iridology for Nature Sunshine Products in their manager school in the 1980s, and shortly after I left Nature Sunshine in the early 90s, Nature Sunshine got an injunction from the FTC to stop promoting iridology, and it happened because CNN went and did an expose in which they took healthy people, they'd taken to a doctor, they had had a complete physical exam, checked for various things, and then they took them to different iridologists who told them they had this disease and that disease and the other disease and blah, 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 and they kind of showed this is a hoax. Now, if those iridologists had been practicing the kind of iridology that I've learned from Bill Cardona and Harry Wolf and Denny Johnson, and that we teach in the International Iridology Practitioners Association, that never would have happened. Now, iridology would not have gotten that bad reputation. We wouldn't have gotten that thing because people would have understood. They would have looked in the eyes and they would have been talking about genetic tendencies and not trying to make diagnoses from the eye. So, with that basic background, we're going to talk about some of the most fundamental concepts of iridology. This is quick, easy, down and dirty stuff that's easy for anybody to see. And the first part is that there are three major constitutional types or genotypes, genetic types in the iris. And they are the blue-eyed people, the brown-eyed people, and then there is a category of what's called mixed colored eyes. And some people, iridologists, teach there are only blue eyes and there are only brown eyes, but genetically there is a mixed eye, and so mixed eye people are not just people who need to be cleansed or detoxified. That is a separate type. Now we call the blue-eyed people the lymphatic constitution, the mixed eye is the biliary constitution, and the brown eye is the hematogenic constitution. We'll go through what each of those mean, starting with the blue-eyed lymphatic type. So in the blue-eyed type, you have basically blue eyes with maybe just a little bit of color in them. You kind of get a gradation of where, you know, a person starts to move out of the blue-eyed into being a little bit of a biliary constitution. It's not like there's a clear differentiation there, but basically if the eyes are mostly blue or have a little bit of a greenish cast, and by the way, a greenish cast to the eye is just, the iris fibers are not actually blue. It's the way the light reflects through the fibers in the same way that the sky looks blue because of the way the light refracts off the upper atmosphere. So some people have a different way they reflect light, which makes their eyes look a little green, but it's all just basically due to light refraction. So the people who have the blue eyes have certain areas where they're most prone to genetic risk. In other words, where their health is likely to break down under stress. And one of the major ones, the reason it's called lymphatic constitution, is the lymph system, which is really highly tied up with the immune system. So these people are prone to congestion or stagnation of the lymphatic system, which often accompanies things like respiratory system problems. In early childhood, there's more of a tendency to earaches, sore throats, tonsillitis, developing later into problems like allergies, asthma, respiratory congestion, and ultimately down into more problems with the joints in arthritis and that sort of thing. There also tends to be a problem with the urinary system, inefficient filtration of waste acids from the body due to inherent poor kidney function. Now, these are very general tendencies, and there are other signs and indicators that exacerbate these and make them more serious risk factors, which we'll look at some examples of that as we go along. Basically, a lot of this has to do with mucous membranes. So you have mucous membranes lining the respiratory passages, mucous membranes lining the urinary system, as well as mucous membranes lining your digestive tract, all of which is your first line of immune defense. So this is kind of the major area where these people are likely to have health issues showing up in their life. The mixed or biliary pattern is characterized by two major things. One is in a true brown eye, you will see an even layer of pigment that completely obscures the iris fiber structure underneath. Now, if you look closely in this eye, especially down at the bottom part, you'll see iris fibers showing through the colors, and those fibers that are showing through the colors are part of what makes this a mixed eye rather than a true brown eye. The other thing is the non-uniform nature of the pigmentation. True brown eyes have a very uniform pigmentation over the surface of the entire eye, whereas the biliary eye, even if it's very brown like this one is, has, you notice, darker brown, lighter brown, orange color, a little bit of orangey, yellow or orange color. The color pattern is very uneven, and that's the characteristics of a biliary eye pattern. So the biliary eye pattern its primary risk area is in metabolism, in the metabolism of nutrients. So this involves weakness of the whole digestive metabolic process, in that the body will have a tendency to make errors in digesting and processing different kinds of nutrients, fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, which results in a tendency to a higher level of toxicity due to the inefficient metabolism of certain nutrients. So this eye pattern is the one that often responds very well to people putting these people on cleanses, because it's the idea of kind of helping to clear their body of this metabolic residue from improperly breaking down the fats, proteins, and carbohydrates and other nutrients that they eat. The liver is a major area of risk in the biliary constitution because there may be problems with the detoxification pathways in the liver, and the liver being able to efficiently detoxify things, which can lead to a wide variety of health problems because, for instance, PMS often arises from issues in liver detoxification, migraine headaches, skin eruptive diseases are often tied to liver problems. So all of these things that happen when a person has inefficient liver detoxification are common in people with biliary eye patterns. The gallbladder and pancreas as digestive organs, they may have problems breaking down fats. They may have problems managing blood sugar, which leads to things like hypoglycemia and diabetes. They're at increased risk for these sorts of problems. The third major type, the brown-eyed or hematogenic type. Now notice that there's this fairly even layer of pigmentation over the entire iris structure. Now it's a little lighter on one side than it is on the other side, but if you look where the flash is, this little thing of light right here, that's because the flash is shooting from this side, so it's making this side brighter. But really, this iris has a very, very thick layer of pigment over the entire fiber structure of the eye, obscuring it. And the color is also very uniform. The other thing that you'll look for is, because this is due to the melanin, which is the same thing that makes dark skin, often there is some of that melanin in the actual white of the eye. So in other words, you see the brownish color on the outside edge going into what's called the sclera, or the white of the eye. That's another common characteristic you'll see in hematogenic eye patterns, or the true brown eyes. Now the primary risk area for hematogenic, think of hemo meaning blood, hematosis. So that is the circulatory system. People with a hematogenic constitution are at higher risk of heart disease, hardening of the arteries, and imbalances of blood chemistry. They're more prone to anemia. They're more prone to having too much viscosity of their blood. There is a little bit of the same risk pattern that you see with the biliary constitution, with the liver and gallbladder. But one other major area of risk besides the circulatory system has to do with minerals. That is, hematogenic types have problems with the storage of minerals and are more likely to get like hardening of the lymph tissue or hardening of the arteries. And often they need help with regulating minerals in their body, which also relates to the anemia and iron, okay? And there is also some risk of hormonal imbalances with that as well. So I, for example, have numerous iridology slides, most of which are the blue or biliary constitution, and have very few true brown eyes in my collection, and yet I have far more signs of circulatory issues in my few brown eyes than I do in my blue eyes. Now, in addition to these major types, there's these subtypes, and these are called many of them diatheses, which refers to this idea of their again, this kind of genetic or maybe epigenetic errors in the way the body handles things, or and they're subtypes of these three basic types. So most of these subtypes are found predominantly in blue-eyed people, a few in the biliary constitution, and there aren't that, most of them are not actually found in the hematogenic constitution. So we're going to go through these major constitutional subtypes: the overacid or febrile eye, the uric acid diathesis, the hydrogenoid constitutional subtype, which is also lymphatic tophi, or in radiology the ring of harmony, the scurf rim, which in radiology is the ring of purpose, and the lipemic diathesis, which Jensen called a sodium cholesterol ring, which has also been called a lipid ring, and Denny calls it a ring of determination. So this is not the best example of this in terms of being able to because it's difficult to see in the slide, but I think on the broadcast it looks better than it does on my screen. If you see the kind of whitish colored fibers in this eye, that is the tendency towards the overacid eye. The white in the iris fibers, the more raised up the iris fibers are, the more they tend to appear white. And so the raised iris fibers tend to go with a more hyperreactive constitution. Now, when the whole eye is very white, that's considered febrile. And these are very closely related. I don't really try very much to differentiate between the two, because it's sort of like a fine gradation between a little bit overacid up to being completely febrile. But basically, the overacid is a blue iris with whitish fibers, whereas the febrile, the whole iris is kind of whitish blue. There's a tendency to high acidity in the tissues, which means that this is actually a sign of a tendency towards a kidney weakness. One of the primary functions of the kidneys is to remove the waste acid that's a byproduct of metabolism. If the kidneys are inefficient at doing that, then that is going to mean there's going to be a risk for accumulating more acid in the tissues, which increases the risk of things like allergies, arthritis, fibromyalgia, or other kind of, think of as kind of hot, inflammatory type, overreactive kinds of conditions. Now, with the febrile type, this extends, all of the things with the overacid type apply to the febrile type, but there's also a higher tendency towards fevers, especially when you're in a child, so there's that kind of hot condition, and also more of a tendency to acute inflammation and exudative conditions. Now, there's a good sign to this, in that people who have this iris pattern their body tends to react quickly with kind of a hyperinflammation and knocks toxins and things out very rapidly, but it often knocks them out, through the skin, causing skin problems and stuff like that, which is good for your overall health, because you're less likely to develop chronic problems, but the cosmetic appearance of it may not be so nice. There also is a tendency for these people in their personality to be hyper-reactive. In fact, I had met this person and went down to Las Vegas with her and a friend to go see a concert, and listened to her all the way down, and right before the concert and everything, and she was constantly, she'd get irritated over this or irritated over that or talk about this or blah, blah, blah. This very, very kind of volatile personality, but they get over it quickly. So I was reading her eyes, and I said, you tend to react very quickly. She said, no, I don't. Well, the thing is that she had been a police officer, and so she knew how to control her temper and everything, but just observing her personality, she would react like, oh, that person, they're annoying, blah, 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 okay? I mean, quickly reacting, whereas somebody who was a slower reacting person would just probably even hardly notice until the thing got so annoying that they would just not be able to annoy it. Now, the uric acid diathesis is a little different in that it's not just the whitish fibers, it's more like there is this whitish plaque that kind of smeared, looks like it's smeared over the top of some of the iris fibers. In this eye, you see it particularly towards the top part of the eye. There's a little discoloration in there, but you can see that kind of patchy, kind of smeary kind of thing to the iris fibers. You can see a little bit in the right side of the iris towards the right lower part of the iris. That's the uric acid diathesis, which is very similar to the overacid and febrile type, but it's very specific to the fact that the kidneys are inefficient at removing uric acid from the body, which is urea is a byproduct of protein metabolism, which means that these people have a harder time removing the acid waste from high protein foods, which makes them more prone to gout, which is basically high levels of uric acid, but also rheumatism, arthritis, and back pain is another big problem with this. Also because that acid the body tends to buffer it with calcium, then that also means that there's a greater risk of the formation of kidney stones as calcium is excreted through the kidneys to try to buffer the acid, and also urinary tract inflammation, and possibly also calcification and calcium deposits as well in this iris pattern. Okay, now this is kind of similar to the uric acid diathesis, except it's these puffy little clouds. They look like almost like little clouds towards the outside edge of the iris. Now in the uric acid diathesis, they'll kind of smear towards the center, or you'll see a similar thing, but they won't be such little formed dots. And this hydrogenoid subtype, which can appear in the lymphatic constitution and also in the biliary constitution. So here you see it in a biliary constitution eye, where the little cloudy things are discolored, but all the way out around the outside ring you see these little like cloudly like formations. That is the hydrogenoid subtype. Also known, those little cloudy things are also known as lymphatic tophi. This increases all of the basic tendencies of the lymphatic type. So in other words, all that increased risk of lymphatic congestion, respiratory problems, urinary tract problems, etc., this aggravates all that. That makes it more pronounced, okay? So there's a greater tendency to swelling of the lymph nodes, excess mucus production, fluid retention, also a tendency towards a hyperreactivity of the immune system, which makes a person more prone to allergies, asthma, and autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. There is an emotional interpretation of this in rayet iridology, that people with this sign tend to have high ideals and really want to go out and kind of rescue the world, as it will. They often have sort of poor personal boundaries and feel hyper responsibility for other people and what's going on in the world, and don't want discord and contention, want harmony in their lives, and so they're kind of be peacemakers, which means they may have a difficult time saying no when they should be saying no, because they want to appease people, they want to keep the peace, they want to save the wells, they want to do, all this. So none of that's a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of, that if you have one of these, in your eye, it's not just, when I first learned it, this is like an allergy to dairy, and, if you need to stay away from dairy. But I met a woman who hadn't eaten dairy foods in 20 years, and she was frustrated because she still had this sign. And I said, well, but this also means that you really feel driven to help people and do good in the world and blah, blah, blah. And it fit, the personality part of it fit her perfectly. And I said, so it's a genetic tendency. It's not something that, is going to go away just because you're not eating dairy products or wheat or mucus-forming foods, okay? The scurf rim is a dark area right at the very periphery of the iris where there's an absence of iris fiber structure. So you see how the fiber structure sort of fades at the edge, and you get this kind of dark area. the outer edge of the iris on the iris map is the skin. So this is a sign related to the skin. And what it is that if there's a tendency to a lack of good circulation into the skin, in other words, the microcirculation or energy going into the skin, which can cause suppressed elimination through the skin. In other words, the person doesn't perspire as easily, and because perspiration is one of the ways the body regulates temperature and also helps to detoxify itself, that can also stress the kidneys because the skin has been called the third kidney. There is an increased risk for skin conditions like acne, psoriasis, and eczema, and also a increased risk of poor microcirculation to the extremities of the body. And again, with Denny, with rayed iridology, there is an emotional interpretation of this, which is that people who have this sign tend to feel that they have a sense of mission or a special purpose in life or some kind of path that they're supposed to be on. But they also often have trouble finding the path, and they may fear failure or trouble and have difficulty finding focus. In other words, sort of like they're having a hard time bringing who they are out to the surface. In other words, you know, I think of it as kind of a thick skin, not a thick skin as being hardened or insensitive, but a thick skin as being kind of stuck inside of a shell that it's hard to break through and really know who I am and express who I am to the world. I remember shortly after I learned that, I had a woman who said, you know, would you read my eyes? And before I even could raise a light and the magnifier to look in her eyes, she said, I know I'm a mess. And I looked in her eyes. She actually had beautiful blue eyes, but she had a very pronounced scarf rim. And I looked at her and I said, no, you're not a mess. You know that you're a very special person, you have a very special reason for being here, and you're just having a hard time figuring out how to manifest that in the world. And she burst into tears. I mean, literally, I hit the nail on the head. She immediately just felt like I understood her completely, which is one of the great values of understanding iridology is I often can develop very instantaneous rapport with people because as I look at some of the stuff in their eyes and I start telling them a little bit about who they are and what they're like, they feel like, wow, somebody really understands me. Someone's really seeing me. And that really opens them up to being more willing to listen to what I have to say. This whitish ring at the periphery of the iris that I've got the little arrows pointing to is called a lipemic diathesis. The lipemic diathesis can appear in all three types. It's most common in the hematogenic type, but here it is in a biliary eye pattern. And it's actually not in the iris itself. It's in the cornea that covers the iris, and it's an intrusion of little fatty particles that come up into that and kind of start to obscure the iris fibers. So this sign is actually sitting above the level of the iris. And here is a very pronounced one in a hematogenic iris pattern that you can see is actually not white, but even starting to get a little bit of a gray color. This is now this, as I mentioned, used to be called a sodium cholesterol ring. And it has nothing to do with eating salt, and it really has nothing to do with cholesterol per se. It is a sign of liver problems with impaired fat or glucose metabolism. In other words, it is a sign that that you're having problems with fat or glucose metabolism in the liver, which often can involve the glands as well. So it can involve problems with the pancreas, thyroid, or adrenals. Now, there is an increased risk of cardiovascular issues, of hardening of the arteries and heart disease and stroke with this sign. However, that is much more prominent if this sign shows up in the eyes of someone under the age of 50. Now, I'm 60, and I actually have developed a little of this in kind of the lower part of my eye in the last 10 years. A lot of people develop this as they get older. In fact, when you look into the eyes of people who are like 70, a lot of them have this. So it's also a sign of aging. What's interesting is, from Denny Johnson's point of view, it has a personality tendency, which I know is true of me. It indicates, he calls it the ring of determination, and indicates it as a sign of a very determined personality that basically is very strong-willed, and to the point that they can start to become stubborn and inflexible. And so I know that what's happened to me over the last 10 years is I've gotten more stubborn. I used to be far more yielding and flexible and easygoing, and part of me is kind of tired of putting up with it. So in a way, it can be a very positive sign, because people who have this sign tend to get things done. They drive through the obstacles, they stick to their task, they make it happen. Again, to the point of even sometimes being a little bit stubborn about things. And so to me, the personality indications tend to set a very different tone to this. So we've covered the major constitutional types and subtypes. Now we're going to look at a second aspect of basic constitutional iridology, and that is the idea of structural integrity or resiliency. And this is basically the density and tightness and the weave of the iris fibers themselves, which tells us a lot about the inherent structural strength of the body genetically. And we're going to look at 5 different structural integrity patterns. We're going to look at the basic concept of resiliency, and then the neurogenic type, the connective tissue type, the polyglandular type, or daisy petal eye as it's sometimes called, and the anxiety tetanic type, all of which are structural patterns. So resiliency is basically how much stress a person's body can cope with before it will break down. And also that has to do with how rapidly you can recover after you've been injured or after you've had a health breakdown, or how much abuse your body can take. And a really good analogy to help understand this is to look at wood. You have softwoods, you have medium woods, and then you have hardwoods. So what characterizes softwoods, such as, let's say, pine, if any of you ever looked at pine, they sometimes call it knotty pine, not naughty as in bad, but knotty as in K-N-O-T-T-Y, because it's full of knot holes. So if you take a pine board and it's got knot holes in it, then there's a very loose structure to the wood fibers. So if you can imagine a board that's got a couple of knot holes in it where that creates a weakness of the board at the place where the knot hole is, and you then imagine putting a load on that board, at a certain point that board's going to have more of a load that it can handle. It's going to break. Now if you take a piece of oak has extremely tight, dense, very closely held together fibers, which means it's harder to chip, it's harder to carve, it's harder to work with, but it's much more durable. Then you take that nice oak board and you put the same amount of weight on it, it's going to handle a heck of a lot more weight before it breaks. And that's the idea of resiliency, which has to do again with the structural tone of how dense or tight the fibers are. So the more tightly packed and closely tightly woven the iris fibers are, the higher the resiliency. The more physical stress a person can handle without their body breaking down, and the faster they will recover. So when you get those kind of, I think of them as like knot holes in the iris fiber structure, where there's openings in the weave and there's less density to the fiber structure, that means that the body is less resilient, can handle less of a load, and therefore this person has to be a little more careful with their energy and their health, and may need to allow themselves, more time to recover when they do get sick or they do have a breakdown. And that's the difference between these two types. Now, in old-style iridology, what people would get obsessed with is the iridology map, and they would look at every one of these little openings in the fiber structure and say, oh, you've got a weakness here, and weakness here, and weakness here, and a weakness here, and no, that's not the way it works. This is just an overall pattern. The little individual openings in this pattern really don't mean much. There's a concept that if you take the iridology class of topo-stabile and topo-labile, which means is it important on the map or is it just a general pattern? And if it's a general pattern, then it has no real significance on the map. Now there's a special case of the resilient eye fibers called the neurogenic type. And the neurogenic type has very fine eye fiber structure. I mean, so there's a lot of resiliency there, but if you'll notice the fibers have this kind of appearance like wet hair that's had a comb run through it. There's this fine kind of delicate nature to the fibers. They're not quite as densely packed, even though they're very straight, fairly dense. They look like they've had this like comb run through them. This particular type, while having strong resiliency, is sensitive in the nervous system. So in other words, while they can physically handle the load, neurologically, the thing that'll break them down is just too much mental and emotional stress. In other words, they'll handle the physical stuff pretty well, but they are more prone to breakdowns of the nervous system. That's just why they called the neurogenic type. Now, so the neurogenic are prone to nervous system weakness. They may experience headaches, vascular spasms, skin eruptions when they get nervous. They tend to be hardworking, but they don't recognize their limits, so they basically will often push themselves too hard and have kind of a mental and emotional breakdown of sorts. And we'll talk a little bit more about the personality characteristics of this when we talk about the basic personality types, but all of the strongly resilient people with the neurogenic types tend to have this active kinesthetic nature that we'll talk about later. Now this less resilient type with all of these rounded openings in the iris fiber structure, this is called the connective tissue type. And so this is the type, again, that is more prone to structural breakdown. Interestingly enough, they're actually more emotionally resilient than the denser type. Wherever nature gives you a liability, it gives you a compensating strength, and vice versa. Wherever you have a strength, you have a compensating liability. So every iris fiber pattern has its strengths and its weaknesses. It's just in this particular case, it's the structural system that tends to be weaker. So there's a tendency to a lack of connective tissue strength, which increases a person's risk for organ prolapse, varicose veins, hemorrhoids, spinal subluxations, the development of hernias, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These people have a harder time holding on to minerals and creating good dense structure in their body. So they often do better with getting, a higher intake of minerals, especially trace minerals, and also giving themselves more time to recover from injury or illness. They also have a personality characteristic, which we'll talk about later, which is the emotional spontaneous type. Now, a special case of the connective tissue type is the polyglandular type, and it's also been called the daisy petal eye. So if you look at the little rounded openings, which are called lacuna, they're placed around this ring in the iris that's called the collarette. It used to be called the autonomic nerve wreath, and so they look like the petals of a daisy. And poly meaning many, glandular, this is a general weakness of the glandular system. Now it has the same physical characteristics as the connective tissue type, plus you have this added thing that it is, because the glands sit along the collarette, that this is a general weakness of the glandular system. So you've got the same structural and personality tendencies as the connective tissue type, but you have this general weakness of the glands and possibly some digestive and intestinal weakness as well. There may also be some weakness in the heart, liver, and kidneys, which are also organs which their map areas touch the edge of the collarette, or the little ridge that runs around the eye. This is the anxiety tetanic subtype. Now, what these are concentric circular rings called contraction furrows, not radial furrows, contraction furrows that run around the eye. Now, they may be even or they may be broken. There may be one or several layers of them, but they run around the eye this pattern. So this is an anxiety tetanic type in a biliary constitution. And these rings are signs of a tendency to a lot of neuromuscular tension. In other words, these people tend to hold a lot of tension in their body, a lot of stress in their body, which makes them prone to disorders related to muscular tension, such as tension headaches, or TMJ, or tachycardia, or angina, or muscle spasms, or cramps. They do have a definite personality tendency with this sign. And that personality tendency is they tend to be hyperachievers. They tend to have a hard time sitting still, being quiet, relaxing, and being calm. They want to be active and busy and on the go, and they tend to take on more than they can handle. So they basically got involved in way too many projects. And they therefore can also suffer an emotional thing from pushing themselves too hard, mood swings, depression, hysteria, and they also will tend to be attracted to stimulants like taking a lot of caffeine to keep pushing themselves. So that's most of the children that I have seen that have been in a kind of hyper and that people call ADHD will have an anxiety tetanic subtype and have a hard time sitting still. So the final thing we want to talk about in our introductory class is the basic personality types. We have 4 of them: the emotional spontaneous type, which Denny Johnson calls the flower type, the analytical thinking type, which Denny Johnson calls the jewel, the active kinesthetic or stream, and the extremist innovative or shaker. And we also have the idea of inner or outer directed, or introversion extroversion is another way of saying that. So the emotional spontaneous type basically goes back to that same thing as we talked about as the connective tissue type and the polyglandular type. It's the rounded openings, which are called lacuna, in the surface of the iris fibers. So you see what looks like little petals of a flower that are kind of embedded around the eye. This is a kind of mild polyglandular eye as well. Those rounded openings make a person have a more emotional bend to their personality, which is why I call them an emotional type. And that also makes them more kind of impulsive, a spontaneous, act from their heart or feelings kind of person. So first of all, people with this pattern tend to be very open-minded and very flexible in their thought processes and attitudes, and they tend to make decisions based on what feels good. They're heart-driven people. So basically, if you ask them, well, why did you do that? Well, it felt right. It just felt like it was the right thing to do. That feeling approach to life. So they're more likely to just, come home, well, let's go out to dinner tonight, that kind of thing. Without having to think about it, plan it, ask questions about it, just to basically, go with the flow of their feelings. They are auditory learners. Now, this is one of the things that I find, again, iridology extremely valuable when you're working with clients, is because immediately I look at this person and I know several things about them. One is they're going to tend to be agreeable and open-minded. They're going to listen to what I say, and they're going to learn very well from me telling them things, verbally telling them things. But at the same time, because they're flexible, they have a harder time with compliance. So in other words, they're like, yeah, wow, excited, oh, this is fascinating, blah, 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 but a week later, they're on to something else and they've totally forgotten what you've told them. So follow through, you know, and trying to hold these people accountable so that they know they're going to have to come back and report to you and tell you how they did, to give them a little structure and help them, you know, follow through with what you're saying is very important, because they may act like, oh yeah, that's great, that's wonderful, but then they may have a real hard time with compliance. All right. You know when you've reached them because they're visual communicators, which means they use a lot of facial expression when they talk, and they can be very animated. They talk a lot with their hands. Now, I'm a shaker type, but all shaker types have a predominant personality type, so I'm a shaker flower. And any of you who've seen me in person know that I talk with my hands, I gesture a lot, I use a lot of facial expressions, because that's the flower nature of my personality coming out. And I also tend to paint pictures with my words. And I'll even say things like, I see what you're saying, which is a visual communication, a visual response. So also, when someone touches us through our heart, through our feelings, and these people, remember, are feeling driven, so when you touch them, when what you say gets through to them, they'll go, oh, wow, ooh, oh, it's this kind of round sound kind of thing that you'll hear them say, wow, ooh, ah, oh. No. I am as a shaker type, I tend to go, okay, okay. Now, we didn't talk about pigments, but when you see a lot of these little spots, specific spots of pigment, not areas of the iris that are shaded with color, but specific spots of pigment, and this one's got a lot of them in them. This is what characterizes the analytical thinking type, or jewel. Analytical because they tend to approach the life through an analysis. They analyze things, and they're very thoughtful. Denny calls them jewels. So there's the flower, which is kind of the open, spontaneous. The jewel, which jewels are still very precious or whatever, but jewels are made by this concentration of energy compressing things together tightly. So jewels, the minute I look into an eye pattern and see someone as a jewel, I know that unless they're already converted to natural healing, and they're coming in to see me because they already believe in me, that they're going to be a bit skeptical. You're going to need to reason with them. You're going to need to be deliberate in your discussion. So I had a friend of mine drug her mother in to see me, and I pulled the light up to her eyes, and before I could say a word, just barely saw it, she says, "How did you learn to do this?" And I could see that she was a jewel. Now, jewels are visual learners, so they learn best when you show them things, when you give them anything that's visual that they can look at. They want you to show them. Now that's, in other words, proof to them is something that they can see. They've got to be able to see it with their eyes. So rather than just say something, I actually got up out of my chair, I walked over to the wall, and I showed her my Iridology certificates, and I said, this is my certificate from this class, and this is my certificate from that class, and that's my certificate from this class. And I ran over to my library, and I pulled out several of my Iridologies, and these are some of the textbooks I've studied, and I laid them in front of her. She says, that means I got through to her. because see, that's the sound that jewels will make when they get it, when you got through to them. And then I went on. Okay, again, this is one of the values of iridology, is knowing how to communicate with people, how to reach them. So while they're visual learners, they're auditory communicators. They communicate with words, but jewels use words with precision. Jewels like, you know, I mean, a lot of more scientifically minded people are jewels, and they like to use scientific terms, and to them words have very precise meaning. I had a girlfriend who was like this, and I tend to use words kind of loosely because I'm trying to communicate feeling and passion and pictures and everything, and she would grab onto certain words and say, you said this, and I go, but I was trying to say, well, you said this, okay, giving me the exact word, because to me, the words were very deliberate. To me, words are not deliberate. That's a difference in the way a jewel thinks and the way a flower thinks. But here's the beautiful thing. A jewel personality, while they may be resistant to or whatever, once you get through to them and you help them understand what they need to do, you don't have to worry about follow-through, because they're the kind that'll keep checklists. They'll do it exactly the way you say it. You say take 2 capsules 3 times a day, they'll take 2 capsules 3 times a day. I mean, no more, no less, you know? So they're much better at follow through, and once you've converted a jewel to something, they're going to stick with it, and it's a lot easier to do that. Again, that short sound, you know, is the way they respond. They tend not to use gestures, not to be. A lot of times their face doesn't show a lot of expression when they're talking. So, you know, if you're a flower personality and you're used to a lot of visual expression, and you're looking at someone who's a jewel and they're talking, you don't see all that animation, that doesn't mean, you know, that they're not engaged. It just means that they just don't do that. That's not their nature. They're much more thoughtful and collected and concentrated. And I notice that when jewels lecture, they tend to make points. They might hold up a finger and make a point, instead of like me, I gesture with these round circles and blah, 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 in the way I talk. Now, in between the flower and the jewel, the one that is in the middle of the personality continuum is the stream, which I call the active kinesthetic type. And this is the person that has that nice, strong, resilient constitution. So you see that there aren't all the rounded openings in this eye. There's a couple of little teeny ones, and while there's a little bit of pigment in the eye, there aren't these like spots of pigment in the eye. So mostly just nice straight iris fibers. That's what characterizes the stream. Now there is not a clear, distinction, because you can have like a jewel stream or a flower stream, or a little bit of a mixture of these characteristics. But this is a pretty good example of someone who's a stream personality. Now, stream personalities, as the idea of kinesthetic gives, are people who are body-centered in their learning processes. They are very in tune to their bodily senses and to movement, and tend to be more balanced in their approach to life. These are doing people. In other words, if you want a job done, get an active kinesthetic person, because they do things. They like to do things. They like to be productive and active and hardworking. And they tend to mediate extremes. They try to they help the jewels and flowers communicate with each other. They try to go out and make sure everything's done and people are taken care of, and that sort of thing. Remember, these are also people who have a very strong physical structure, so they often tend to be athletic. They like dance, sports, movement, things that engage their bodies. Now, what's interesting is these are often the people, especially the children, especially if they are also an anxiety tetanic subtype. So in other words, if you see a child who's an active kinesthetic child with an anxiety tetanic subtype, they're going to be labeled attention deficit, and the schools want to drug them up because they're doers. They hate to sit still. They want to be out doing something. They want to be moving. They actually learn best when they're moving. An active kinesthetic type will actually learn more in a class when they're pacing back and forth at the back of the classroom, because they process information through their body. Their decisions are more kind of gut-based, instinctive. So I sensed that this was right. I got it. See the kinesthetic thing. I got it. They're visual auditory learners, which means they observe and imitate, and they communicate through touch and movement. That's why they can express themselves well in sports and dance, or by giving a hug or touching someone. Oftentimes very touchy-feely. These people often make very good massage therapists, for example, and they respond with the which is what we tend to do when we feel good in our body. Someone starts massaging our full shoulders and go, and something gets us emotionally excited and we go, oh, and something enlightens us and we go, ah. Okay, so the ah is more of the mental thing, the oh is the more emotional, and the is the more physical, which, interestingly enough, you put that together and you got ah, Okay, now the last type is the mixed learner type, and excuse me, just need a little drink of water here. This is the type that has both the lacuna, the little flower petals, the flower personality, and the jewels, the little pigment spots in them. And so because they have both, they are both mental and emotional, which makes them the shaker type in Denny Johnson's model, or what I call the extremist innovative type. And these are people, it's sort of like they've got a war going on inside of themselves between the head and the heart. They're like, they're trying to reconcile their thought and their emotions constantly. Like what do they think is right, what do they feel is right, and so forth. And this internal restlessness between head and heart causes them to be often very discontent with the status quo. They want change. They're typically at the forefront of change and invention and creativity and adoption of new ideas, tend to be very dynamic and restless. And they can also vacillate in their decision making. Remember, the jewel can be really stick-to-itive. The flower can be, kind of impulsive but changeable. These people can often go back and forth. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I go with my reasoning? Should I go with my heart? Kind of thing. And so compliance can be an issue for them. If once you get a jewel or a stream with what they need to do, they're usually going to be pretty good with compliance. But flowers and extremist innovative types have a lot harder time with compliance. Flowers, because they get on to the next interesting thing, but jewels simply because they have a hard time sticking to anything for any length of time. They like to bounce around a lot, and they like change. What also is interesting is on the physical level, their body is the same way. You'll find that shakers or extremist innovative types also, you put them on a program and it'll work for a while, and then their body shifts and it stops working and they have to switch what they take. I have to constantly switch up what I take, being a shaker personality, because nothing works for me for very long. So I wind up having to mix my program around to adjust as things change inside of me. They're touch movement learners. Now what that means is I'm the kind of person who, being a shaker, who I get the the thing in the box, and I start trying to assemble it before I read the instructions. Where I get the new piece of software and I start to try to. In other words, we love to learn by just getting in and trying it out, and there's trial and error. But we're both visual and auditory communicators, so we communicate both with words and pictures, which could make us really good teachers. All extremist innovative types are going to be dominant in one of the other three learning types. So in other words, they're going to be more auditory, they're going to be more visual, or more kinesthetic. In other words, they're going to be a little more of a flower, or a little more of a stream, or a little more of a jewel in their basic personality tendency. But the extremist innovative thing takes that personality tendency to an extreme. Now, any of you study marketing, there's 4 categories of people in marketing. There are your innovators. They're the people who are most willing to try something new. And then you have, this says early adopters, but that's really not the best word, because early adopters are people who follow the innovators. And then you have the late adopters who follow the early adopters. And then you have the diehards that are like, I'm never going to do that. And then they finally give in at the end when 80-90% of the other people are doing it. So when cell phones first come out, the people who are going to take it are going to be more innovative types, and then so on and so forth. That all products follow that pattern of adoption. So basically, personality-wise, shakers tend to be the innovators, flowers tend to be the early adopters, streams tend to be the late adopters, and jewels tend to be the diehards. Now that also increases with age, because younger people tend to be more innovative, and then early adopters, and then middle-aged people more late adopters, and then older people more, diehards in terms of change. But there's also personality factors in that. So let's just take a look at some iris patterns and just kind of put some of the things that we've learned in this basic class together. So Bill Caradona, who's one of the founders of IPA, starts with resiliency. Myself and several other people like to start with color, because just color to me is something that stands out as one of the first things I see. So I look at this, and this person is a biliary eye pattern, or a mixed eye. Now, we didn't cover what the different colors mean, but the different colors in the mixed eye pattern give us clues as to what kinds of nutrients this person may be having trouble metabolizing. The dirty orange color is typically adrenal, not adrenal, I mean pancreas, with blood sugar issues. So this person is very prone to metabolic error in sugar metabolism. The little kind of yellowish color actually also relates to the kidneys. So there is some tendency with this person to have some problems with digestion and metabolism, particularly related to carbohydrates, which puts them to be prone to things like hypoglycemia and diabetes. They also have a scurf rim, which is one of the basic subtypes, which means the problems with elimination through skin and the microcirculation to the skin. They have a slight tendency to, because it's obscured with the color, it's a little harder to see, but there might be a little bit of a tendency to an acid, nature in their eye too, inefficiency of the kidneys filtering acids. Now, structure-wise, go to the resiliency thing. They have a fairly tight iris fiber. There's a little bit of wave to it, but it's a fairly dense fiber, so they've got pretty good resiliency. They're going to be able to, handle stress quite well, stand up to the stresses of life. But they have an anxiety tetanic subtype. Bill Cardona calls that a race car engine and a race car body. So they're an active, personality-wise, they're an active kinesthetic type with a strong, resilient constitution, but they're also prone to be a hyperachiever, to basically try to take on more than they can handle and push themselves too hard and have difficult time relaxing and unwinding the tension in their body. Now, if any of you who know things about blood sugar know that when you have blood sugar problems, you can have blood sugar swings, which can create mood swings. And so you're this hyper-driven personality that also tends to have problems with your blood sugar. You know, that can definitely lead to kind of some problems with, you know, stability of mood and so forth. So what happens is, as you're, especially when you have this client in front of you, and you see their case history, you can see them, you start to see this pattern emerge of who they are and what they're genetically prone to, and you know right off the bat, you know, that there are certain lifestyle things that this person may need to do. One of them is to be careful with the refined carbohydrates and eat a diet to keep their blood sugar balanced. The other one is to do things that are going to help them relax their nerves and not overstress themselves. Take some time to basically allow themselves to unwind periodically and recreate themselves, recreate themselves, recreation. Okay, so this, again, color type, this is a blue-eyed type. The discoloration, of course, you know, is starting to move a little towards the biliary. Again, I didn't cover the colors, but the bright orange color, while it still can indicate the sugar metabolism, is more likely to mean problems with fat metabolism or the gallbladder. So this person maybe have tendencies with problems with digestion of either fats or carbohydrates. There aren't a lot of other, subtypes. I don't see any really subtypes related to this eye that are really prominent we're talking about. But if we go to the structural resiliency, this person again is a very fairly tight iris fiber weave, but because that fiber has that kind of delicate combed hair appearance to it, this person is a neurogenic type. So that means, again, fairly good resiliency, but a tendency to kind of have sensitive nervous system, which they can push themselves too hard and develop health problems based on their nerves basically not being able to handle things very well. They have just, and even though they're primarily an active kinesthetic type, just the presence of that one little tiny lacuna just past 3 o'clock here means that there's a touch of the emotional spontaneous type in this otherwise active kinesthetic person, which will add a little bit of more impulsive nature to them. They have very, very faint contraction furrows, which are the concentric rings. You can barely see them right here. So they have a very mild tendency to an anxiety tetanic type, but not very severe. So the two biggest issues that I would immediately see in this person are problems with the metabolism of sugars and fats, and that delicate nervous system that means they've got to kind of watch their nerves and maybe take some things to help keep their nerves calm and not overdo it. Now, this I would classify as a biliary eye pattern, definitely moving into a lot more coloration in the iris fiber, which means that this person is prone to digestive metabolic problems, liver issues. The brown pigmentation goes more into the liver. So you see a eye pattern like this, and you're looking at someone who genetically is more prone to toxicity of the gastrointestinal tract and problems with the liver being able to detoxify the body. So people who have a biliary pattern, who work around chemicals, will often develop health problems due to their inability to handle those chemicals because of the genetic weakness of their liver. This person also has the hydrogenoid subtype, or the lymphatic tophi. They're discolored out towards the periphery of the eye, but there's little cloudy things out here. So that also means they're prone to lymphatic congestion, allergies, asthma, respiratory stuff, some of the same things that the lymphatic constitution person is prone to as well. So two big risk areas here for this person would be their liver and gastrointestinal tract, making sure that they do some detoxification, keep their liver and GI tract healthy, and then also keeping their lymph moving properly and taking good care of their immune system. Structurally, very nice, dense, tight iris fibers, so a lot of resiliency in this person, a lot of ability to handle physical stress. The small pupil, which again is something you learn about in the class, is a sign of a parasympathetic nervous system dominance. So basically, people who have a parasympathetic nervous system dominance and a strong, resilient constitution often live very long, healthy lives. So, you know, there's a lot of resiliency here in this person, and ability to heal and cope well with stress. Personality-wise, they're a shaker because they have some very tiny little lacuna. Not very prominent, but they're there. There's some little teeny lacuna, and they've also got pigments. They're probably kind of hard to say without seeing the other eye, but I'm going to guess they're more of an analytical shaker because the pigments are more pronounced than the lacuna. So they're one of those people who's on the cutting edge of things, and the hydrogenoid constitution means they've got high ideals. So they're going to express their analytical nature and, you know, wanting to, you know, do things good in the world, help people, and so forth. But that restlessness, that internal restlessness, drives them to be inventive and creative, which is most likely to manifest in more of an analytical, intellectual way than in an emotional way. All right, so this next eye is definitely a lymphatic constitution, a blue-eyed person. This person has the uric acid diathesis subtype, the kind of plaquey material on the eye, which indicates a genetic tendency to an inefficiency of the kidneys in eliminating acid, which is going to cause, you know, problems with the structural system, potential gout, rheumatism, arthritis, increased risk for that. And this introductory class, we don't cover the map, but down at the very bottom of the iris, down in this about 6 o'clock, this is the kidney area, and you notice the fibers are not as dense in that area. Well, that is a little bit of lack of structural tone and integrity in the kidney. So the fact that I call this 3 strikes and you're out. Lymphatic type, one of the weaknesses tends to be urinary. Add uric acid diathesis plus separation of fibers or lack of fiber density in the kidney area. Boom. Immediately, this jumps out at me that one of the major risk areas for this person in their life is kidney issues. So maybe this person came into me and they have high blood pressure. Well, I know that the kidneys are involved in the regulation of blood pressure, and because one of their primary genetic weaknesses is the kidneys, I can get a good hunch that it might be the kidneys that are involved in the problem with their high blood pressure, and therefore if I work on helping the kidneys, that might also help to bring down their blood pressure by giving support to the kidneys. Okay, so that's the constitutional type and the subtypes. There's a little teeny touch of a hydrogenoid constitution, just barely, because there's a few little clouds out in the outside, but it's not very pronounced. Structure-wise, pretty tight fiber, not a real strong resiliency because there are some openings and some looseness in some of the weave of the fibers, but still fairly tight, fairly strong. The person has one little pigment between 3 and 6 o'clock, about 4:30 right there, and they have a few very small lacuna, not very prominent but very small. That means that they're a shaker, but their overall eye pattern is kinesthetic. So this person is going to be more of a kinesthetic shaker, meaning their primary learning and interactive mode is going to be, learning by imitation, being kind of a doer, but that shaker thing is going to kind of push that to an extreme, make them restless, more willing to, go out and explore things, try new things, etc. A little bit of an anxiety-tetanic subtype as well, giving that kind of neuromuscular tension. Not very prominent, but there are just a few contraction furrows in this eye as well. Now this, again, starting with the color, pretty much a blue-eyed type. It's got some pigmentation in it, but the dominant thing is it's the lymphatic type eye. One of the very prominent subtypes in this is the lipemic diathesis, or the lipid ring, the whitish ring on the outside periphery of the eye, which again is an indicator of problems in the liver and possibly glandular system with the metabolism and regulation of fats and carbohydrates, increased risk for cardiovascular problems. Again, the younger it shows up, the more serious that is. This person is, in addition to that, okay, fiber structure-wise, this person is kind of medium in their constitutional resiliency. They have some areas of some pretty good tight fiber, but they also have a number of areas where there's openings and so forth. Not enough to make them a connective tissue type, but enough that it's kind of starting to compromise their resiliency. They're not quite as strong as a person who has tighter eye fibers. Personality-wise, they are definitely a jewel shaker, or an analytical thinking type that's also an extremist innovative type. The reason I say that is because there are the lacuna, rounded openings in their eye, and the pigments, but the pigments are much more prominent, and they're very pronounced pigments, which is going to make this person very much the approach life from their head point of view. And because they are predominantly a jewel shaker, and they also have a lipemic diathesis, this person is going to be stubborn. If I have this person as a client, I need to be aware that they may be very resistant to new ideas. I may have to really show them, give them things to read, really lay stuff out for them in a visual thing to get them to learn it. And very likely happens once a person develops what Denny calls the ring of determination, or the lipemic diathesis. Even if I appear to get them to change their mind, when they come back for a follow-up, they may have forgotten all that and be right back to the position they were before, and I may have to start all over again. That's, again, That's one of the beauties of iridology, is it really helps you understand the person you're working with, which can help you be patient with them because you don't take what's going on with them personally. You realize this is part of kind of their personality makeup, and you just have to kind of work with it and work around it. Again, very valuable thing of iridology. A couple more. Here we have this is really a blue-eyed type, just borderline developing a little biliary things, but mostly I think that's just the lighting, because the eyes look a little green, but remember the greenish cast is mostly due to how the light is refracting off of the eye. So it's really blue. This person definitely has both a hydrogenoid type, the little cloudy pigments around the outside, and also some of the smeary kind of pigmentation, kind of whitish plaque that goes with the uric acid diathesis. So this is definitely a person who tends towards an overacid constitution, lack of kidney filtration of acid wastes, body more hyperreactive to stresses, definitely prone to kidney and lymphatic problems, lymphatic congestion, and maybe some immune issues with that. There's a scurf rim, another of the subtypes in here, the lack of circulation to the skin. But also remember, that is a sign that the person has a sense of destiny or mission in their life. So they feel that they're special, but they may have a hard time, knowing how to express that specialness in the world. The little bit of orange, probably a little bit of problems with carbohydrate metabolism. Structure-wise, pretty good tight iris fiber structure, definitely an active kinesthetic type, or what Denny Johnson calls a stream. Physically oriented, doing oriented, going to say, when you get through to them. This is another blue-eyed lymphatic type. This one has a little bit of hydrogenoid subtype, some cloudiness in the outside, so lymph stuff is, again, a major risk area. Tight fiber structure, active kinesthetic type, good resiliency, good ability to recover from stress, but they also have the anxiety tetanic type, neuromuscular tension, stress being will be a big factor in their health issues. Here's a hematogenic eye pattern, again prone to blood disorders, errors of mineral metabolism. The fact that this is also a connective tissue type means that that mineral thing, this is again how you start to see the eye as a whole. You're not looking at just one thing. You're going, okay, the hematogenic constitution has a hard time hanging on to minerals, but so does the connective tissue type. That means that we've got a double whammy here of someone who's basically going to need more minerals to keep a good healthy structure and function of their body going, just because of their genetics. And of course, this is an example of a flower or emotional spontaneous personality type in a hematogenic constitution. So if you're interested in learning more, I'm a certified comprehensive iridology instructor for IPA, and so I will be teaching IPA Level 1 and IPA Level 2 classes. My IPA Level 1 class will be an online class. My IPA Level 2 class will be a live class. I need to teach a live class for IPA certification. I will be doing one round of each every year, but for this year, I moved the class date back simply because my first recording of the free preview class didn't go, and so I needed to give this a little more time. But I've got the live webinar dates. You don't have to be on the live webinars to take the class. All of the stuff gets posted online. There will be quizzes there will be interactive learning activities. This is one of the things I'm looking forward to doing with the Iridology class online, where you're going to see a picture of an eye and it's going to point to a thing and it's going to say, what is this? And you can type it in and see whether you're right or wrong. So you can actually learn to identify structures and things in the eye through interactive pictorial online learning activities. We're putting all that together. I'm also updating my practical iridology manual. It probably won't be done until towards the end of the class, but we're going to replace all the black and white pictures with color pictures, add everything that's required for IPA certification. The $297 fee for this includes the updated full color manual, all the webinars, there's 10 webinar classes, and the membership with IPA. That's part of the requirement for it to be an IPA class, is that students have to be given a student membership to IPA. So just the manual and the IPA membership alone is basically $100. And then if you've previously taken my practical iridology class, you can take the IPA level 1 for $147. That will include the new updated color manual and the IPA membership. So we're only really charging people who've taken the class before $50 for the class. If you'd like to take the class, you can call our number and register, or you can go online to our websites and register online. The first live class will be in St. George, August 21st and 22nd. That will also be $297, does not include meals or lodging or travel. I will be holding those also in the future, so if you can't make it this year, I'll have another one next year. If you do want to become certified with IPA, it's not just taking the 2 classes. We're offering the classes, but you also have to submit 10 iris evaluations for review. We handle that. You'll do that through us. And there's also a written exam that you have to pass with IPA. So that's separate. We don't administer that exam. IPA administers that exam, and there is a fee for taking that exam. And one other requirement IPA has is you have to prove that you have attended a college-level anatomy and physiology course. We do not currently provide that. I'd like to provide that, in the future, but currently we don't. If you, went to school and became a nurse, or you have some other thing where you've taken an anatomy and physiology class on the college level, you can't. If you haven't, you can contact IPA. They do have some possibilities for doing that by correspondence as well. I'd also like to encourage you to look at our member program, which is $19.95 a month. You get our webinars, the Sunshine Sharing Hour, the Herbal Hour, the Holistic Perspective webinar, discounts on all of our courses and books, and access to our member archives, and we're expanding our member benefits. So thanks to all of you who joined me live while I did this recording. It's really nice to be able to feel like I'm talking to real people and not just to a computer. This will all be recorded and online permanently as part of the class. So again, thank you for participating, and I hope that you enjoyed learning all about this material.